video games. There are challenges that have been faced and the challenges that are yet to come. Nobody knows what's ahead, but one thing's for certain, I will always be ready. "2007, the year of the threequels, Spider-Man 3, Pirates of the Caribbean 3, The Bourne Ultimatum, and Shrek the Third were among many to make film franchises into their own trilogies. In the gaming world, we got this. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption was released on the Nintendo Wii in late 2007, and it received positive reception. Critics and fans praise the storytelling, the use of voice acting, and the utilisation of motion controls, something which the game's predecessors originally did not have until their re-release in 2009 as part of the Metroid Prime trilogy. What do I think of Metroid Prime 3? It's good. I think it's really good, yeah. You want me to explain why, don't you? Alright then. Graphically, it is far superior to both Prime 1 and Prime 2, but that should be expected of a game which came out 5 years after the original. I think the story is great, and this feels much more cinematic than the other two. There are multiple planets to visit in this one too, which makes this a much more grandiose game. In Prime 1, you spent the majority of your time on Talon 4. In Prime 2 Echoes, it was on a planet in which you switched between a light and a dark world, which did work well for the most part, but personally for me, it does get a bit grating, especially when you are aiming for 100% completion. In this game, I still think that it is not as good as the original Metroid Prime, but I think that this is a better game than Echoes, and that's definitely not a criticism of Echoes, because that is a great game in its own right, but personally I prefer Metroid Prime 3 to Metroid Prime 2. In this, you feel like such a badass from the get-go. You start off in your ship, and then you end up on the spaceship. You have most of the arsenal which you have collected from the previous games, instead of just starting with virtually no morph ball, no missiles. Metroid Prime 3 just decided, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put you right in a spaceship. You can double jump, use morph ball bombs, and now with our new motion controls, you can aim more precisely. So aesthetically, this is the best of the trilogy as well. As far as the story goes, there's not much to it. Dark Samus has somehow survived the events of the last game. I mean, I don't know how, because we killed her like multiple times. What a bitch. The space pirates have launched an attack on the Galactic Federation base on the planet Norian, and some of your fellow bounty hunter friends have been affected by Dark Samus. Once again, what a bitch. Now, I've got to say, these other bounty hunters are amazing characters, and it's quite sad what happens to them in this game. Throughout the course of the main campaign, you collect items to improve your arsenal. As you go on, there are some areas in which you have visited before where you can access new areas in order to get new items. So, nothing new here. But that's fine. It sticks to the main formula of the Metroid series, which has been present ever since 1986. When you come face to face with the other bounty hunters and you have to fight them, you can acquire items which relate to their own attacks. You can have ice missiles, and we have the return of my favourite beam from Metroid Prime 1, the Plasma Beam. When I discovered that this was brought back when I was a 12-year-old, I was so happy. Another new beam is the Nova Beam. Unlike previous entries in this game, once you have unlocked a new beam, that is your primary weapon. You no longer have to swap your weapon to the normal power beam in order to open certain doors. It was something which was certainly a big deal, especially in Metroid Prime 2. The killer app for this game though is the inclusion of the all new corruption mode. After the first hour or so of the game, in which you encounter Meta Ridley again, Samus gets this new upgrade to her suit. This allows her to use phase-on based attacks temporarily, and you can use this mode by pressing the plus button. This mode is great. You can use your phase-on attacks to overpower enemies, and it is really useful in boss battles. Now I mentioned about the phase-on there. This has been a recurring theme ever since the first Metroid Prime game. We hardly heard about it in Prime 2, but here it all seems to go full circle, and that's a good thing. As ever, I think the boss battles are great, although I will say the final boss of this game was my least favourite out of the trilogy. It felt a little bit anticlimactic, especially seeing as this was the game to end this whole trilogy, which started 5 years earlier. Once again, the music in this is great. We even have some returning tracks right from the first game, which I think is a nice touch. This is one of the greatest games Nintendo has ever made, and it's actually quite underrated. It seems to get overlooked in favour of Prime 1, and yes, while I do prefer Prime 1 to this, I do really think that this is still a really good game, and it definitely is one of the greatest games to ever come out on Nintendo Wii, but that's not really much of a statement, seeing as the Nintendo Wii hardly had any great games. All the levels have different variety, it never gets so monotonous. The only part of the game where I really felt let down by, especially when I was younger, was the fetch quest, in which you had to collect these tank thingies. They're like these energy tanks. I don't fucking know. To me, it's a poor man's version of the Chozo artifacts and the Dark Temple Keys fetch quests from the previous two games. That said, if you are aiming for 100% completion, then I guess this will be much less of a problem to you. But I certainly feel that this is such a letdown compared to the fetch quests in which we got in Prime 1 and Prime 2. But again, Prime 1 did this the best with the Chozo artifacts. Another thing I like is the introduction of an achievement system. With this you can unlock certain things like concept art, etc. So there's plenty of things that you can do in this game, as well as focusing on the main story. It's a sort of side quest. The game is currently available in 3 forms at the minute. There's the singular release on the Wii, which I got in 2007. It was then re-released as part of the trilogy in 2009. And then the trilogy was re-released again as a eShop title on the Nintendo Wii U. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw another re-release of some sorts of the trilogy on the Nintendo Switch in the future either. All 3 Metroid Prime games are some of the best action-adventure first-person shooter games out there. They are like Nintendo's answer to Halo. In summary, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption was a great way to close out the Prime series. It's just too bad that the Metroid franchise sort of went to shit after this, with the games that came out after this, like Metroid Other M and that shitty Metroid Prime Federation Forces.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
But things are looking up with the recent release of Metroid Samus Returns. But what is this I see before me? We are going to be getting a Metroid Prime 4 on Nintendo Switch?
It looks like all of my prayers have been answered. Shut up, Nintendo, and take my money!